500 years ago, long before tall ships crossed the ocean, long before towns and cities spread across this land, North America was already full of life. From the icy tundra of the far north, to the tall forests of the east, across the rolling plains, and into the deserts and mountains of the west, everywhere, people lived, loved, worked, and dreamed. For thousands upon thousands of years, native peoples had called this land home. They belonged to the rivers, the mountains, the forests, and the open skies, just as much as the rivers and mountains belonged to them. Their history was not written in books, but carried in voices, in songs, in dances, in stories told by firelight. It was carried in the careful planting of corn, beans, and squash. It was carried in the rhythm of paddles on water, in the soft tread of moccasins on forest paths, in the deep respect given to the land and all who lived upon it. The world of that time was rich and full, villages bustling with laughter and work, hunters moving quietly through forests, families gathering berries, elders telling children the stories of long ago. Beauty was found not only in great carvings or tall lodges, but in the small everyday things. The pattern on a basket, the song of a flute, the kindness of a shared meal. To look back at this time is to remember that America did not begin with ships from distant shores. It began here, with the native nations who lived in balance with the earth for countless generations. Their wisdom, their stories, and their way of life from the deep roots of this land. And so, as we begin our long journey into this story, we step gently into their world, a world filled with seasons and songs, with respect and community, with harmony and hope. It is not a world lost, but a world whose echoes still live in the rivers, the forests, and in the memories carried forward today. Now, let us begin. Imagine the world as it was 5 centuries ago, long before highways, cities, or engines. The continent of North America stretched vast and unbroken, its rivers winding through forests, its mountains rising quietly toward the clouds. The air was cleaner, the night skies deeper and darker, filled with stars that few of us see today. If you could step into that time, you would hear the sound of crickets and the rush of water long before you ever heard the sound of a bell or a whistle. You might smell wood smoke drifting gently on the air, or feel the cool touch of grass, wet with evening dew, under your feet. 500 years ago, millions of native people lived across this wide land. They were not one single nation, nor one single way of life. Instead, the land was home to many different peoples, each with their own languages, traditions, and ways of living. Some made their homes among tall forests and lakes. Others lived on great stretches of grassland where herds of animals moved in vast numbers. In dry desert regions, communities learned how to coax crops from the soil with careful care. By the sea, people built strong wooden homes and gathered the gifts of the ocean. Each place shaped the people who lived there, and each people shaped the land in return. The rhythms of daily life were woven with the rhythms of the seasons, planting and harvest, hunting and gathering, celebrations and rest. Picture, if you will, an evening in this world. The sun has dipped low, painting the sky with shades of rose and gold. In the eastern woodlands, families sit outside their longhouses, the day's work behind them. The smoke from small fires curls upward, and children's laughter drifts through the air. In the far southwest, the sandstone walls of pueblos glow softly in the fading light, their terraces holding the warmth of the day. And in the far northern reaches, beyond the great forests, the chill of evening settles over snow and ice, where families draw close inside warm shelters. Wherever you look, life is steady, purposeful, and close to the land. No one is rushing. There are tasks, yes, but they are done in the flow of daylight. The night brings its own slower rhythm, time for food, stories, and gentle songs. You can imagine sitting down among them, welcomed to the fire. A basket of food might be passed your way. Someone might smile and tell you where to sit, perhaps hand you a wooden cup filled with something warm. You are a guest, but also a listener, here to hear not only the stories of the people, but the stories of the land itself. When we speak of 500 years ago, it might sound like a far-off time. Yet, for the people who lived then, life was present, real, and full. Each child carried the laughter of play. Each elder carried the wisdom of memory. Each family carried the tasks of the day and the hopes of tomorrow. So let us walk quietly into their world. Let us move slowly, respectfully, as if we are stepping into a place where time itself has softened, where the wind carries voices from long ago. This story is not about battles or sharp struggles. It is about the calm strength of daily life, how people built homes, prepared food, sang songs, and cared for one another. As we settle into this long journey together, take a breath. Feel the calm in your chest. Imagine that you are sitting by a fire under a sky bright with stars. The night is wide, the company kind, and the story is just beginning. Close your eyes and imagine walking through a forest 5 centuries ago. The trees are tall and generous oaks, maples, hickories, and chestnuts. Their branches weave together above your head, filtering the sunlight into a soft green glow. Birds call from the canopy. Somewhere, water trickles through a nearby stream, carrying the sound of coolness over stone. Here, in this rich land of rivers and woodlands, many native communities made their homes. Villages were often built near fertile soil, close to water for drinking and fishing. At the center of each village, you might see a longhouse, a tall, elongated wooden home, framed with saplings and covered with sheets of bark. Inside, it was warm and welcoming, built for more than just one family. Several related families might share the space, each with their own hearth along the central aisle. The fires glowed steadily, their smoke rising through vents in the roof. If you step inside, you'd notice how the longhouse felt alive with small details. Storage baskets hung from beams overhead, carefully tied. Dried corn and beans might be strung up, safe from pests. Along the walls, bedding made from woven mats or soft furs marked each family's space. The air carried a steady scent of wood smoke mixed with the earthy smell of stored crops and herbs. Children might tumble and play, while elders sat nearby, speaking gently, their words flowing like the rhythm of a familiar song. Daily life here was tied closely to the land. The soil was tended with great care. Families planted gardens of the 3 sisters: corn, beans, and squash. These plants were more than food. They were companions. Corn grew tall, its stalks reaching upward. Beans wound themselves around the corn, climbing for sunlight, while also fixing nitrogen into the soil, helping the earth stay fertile. Squash spread low across the ground, its broad leaves shading the soil and keeping it moist. Together, the 3 sisters thrived, and together, they fed the people. In spring, planting brought hope. Women, who often tended the fields, pressed seeds carefully into the soil, sometimes offering a small prayer or a song. The rhythm of planting was unhurried, guided by the knowledge passed down from mothers and grandmothers. Children watched, learning with curious eyes. By summer, the fields grew lush and green, buzzing with life. By autumn, baskets overflowed with harvest, carried back to the village with laughter and relief. Food was prepared with patience. Corn was ground into meal, sometimes boiled into nourishing stews, sometimes baked into breads. Beans were simmered slowly, often with dried meat or fish added for flavor. Squash was roasted over coals until its sweetness deepened. Meals were not just nourishment, they were gatherings. Family members sat together, passing bowls, speaking softly, sometimes pausing in simple gratitude before eating. Life was not only about work. There were moments of play, of storytelling, of small joys. Children played games with stones or sticks, imitating the tasks of their elders. At night, stories drifted through the longhouse, tales that carried lessons of respect, of humor, of remembering the animals and spirits that shared the world with them. Sometimes a soft song would rise, a mother humming her child to sleep, or a group of voices singing in rhythm with the crackle of the fire. The eastern woodlands were also full of movement and change. Villages were sometimes relocated after years, when the soil needed rest. Trails wound through the forest, connecting one community to another. Trade brought seashells from the coast, copper from distant places, and ideas that traveled with people as easily as goods. But here, a quiet of evening, the sense of belonging was strong. The longhouse was more than a shelter, it was a living symbol of family and community. Each beam, woven mat, carried the mark of hands that worked together. And outside, the field stretched like a promise that tomorrow would bring another harvest, another meal, another story by the fire. If you sit at the doorway of the longhouse as night falls, you can hear the voices inside mixing with the sounds of the forest. An owl calls. The river flows steady in the dark, and you realize this life, simple and grounded, is both ordinary and extraordinary. It is steady as the soil, shining as the stars, and warm as the glow of the fire. Now, let your mind wander from the shaded woodlands into a land where the sky stretches farther than you thought possible. The eastern trees fade behind you, and before your eyes lies an ocean of tall grasses. They bend and ripple in the wind like waves, reaching as far as you can see. The air is open here, the horizon wide, the sky an endless dome of blue by day, and filled with 1,000 glittering stars by night. This is the land of the plains. 500 years ago, a place alive with bison, deer, and pronghorn. Herds of bison, in particular, moved across the grasslands in numbers so great they seemed like rivers of dark fur, flowing slowly across the earth. These animals were more than food. They were central to life itself, providing meat for nourishment, hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools, sinew for string, and even dung for fuel. Every part was used, every gift honored. Villages here were often made of typus or lodges, carefully crafted from poles and hides. A taipai was both sturdy and graceful, built to stand against strong winds, yet light enough to be moved when the people followed the herds. Inside, the fire pit glowed at the center, smoke rising through a small opening at the top. The walls were decorated with painted designs, animals, symbols, and stories that carried meaning. Families sat close around the fire, their voices quiet against the vastness of the plains outside. Life here, too, was communal. Hunting bison was not something one person could do alone. It took the cooperation of many men and women, both working together in patience and trust. One ancient method was the buffalo jump. The hunters would guide a herd toward a cliff or steep slope, moving carefully, disguising themselves, sometimes using fire or noise to encourage the animals forward. At the right moment, the herd would surge, and the people waiting below would prepare to make use of what the land and the animals had offered. It was a dangerous task, one that required skill, timing, and courage. But when successful, it brought enough meat and hides to sustain a community through the harsh seasons. Not every hunt was so dramatic. Sometimes smaller groups worked together quietly, tracking, surrounding, and felling animals with bows, arrows, and spears. Once an animal was brought down, the work began in earnest. Men and women together skinned and cut the meat, stretched hides, dried strips of bison over racks in the sun. The work was steady, but it was filled with a sense of purpose. Every hand had a role. Children carried sticks for fires, elders shared wisdom on how best to preserve the meat, and women stirred large pots where stew bubbled slowly. You might imagine standing at the edge of such a camp, the wind lifting the grasses, the sound of voices carrying on the air. There is laughter among the work, light teasing to ease the labor. There are songs, steady and rhythmic, sung as meat is cut and hides are scraped. Work and joy weave together, as naturally as the grasses and the wind. The land itself shaped life here. Winters could be bitter and long, with storms that swept fiercely across the open plains. Summers could be hot and dry, the ground cracked and thirsty. Yet, through careful preparation, through dried meat, stored berries, and tanned hides, the people endured. Season after season, they did not fight against the land. They moved with it, adjusting their steps to its rhythms. At night, the wide sky offered its own kind of teaching. The stars were guides, patterns remembered and named, helping hunters and travelers find their way. Around a central fire, people would sit together, gazing upward, telling stories that tied the movements of the heavens to the stories of earth. The children listened with wide eyes, comforted by the sound of familiar voices, weaving meaning out of the night. There is something humbling about imagining life on the plains 500 years ago. So much space, so much sky, and yet, within that space, such close bonds of family and community. Each taipai a small circle of warmth against the vastness, each fire a steady glow on the dark horizon. Together, those small circles created a network of life, resilient and enduring. And as you sit here, imagining the grasses swaying in the evening wind, the voices drifting from camp, and the stars above blazing quietly, you can almost feel the calm of that world settling around you. The air is cool, the fire is warm, and the land seems endless, steady, and strong. The land changes as we move south and west. The grass is thin, the air grows drier, and the sky blazes with a fiercer sun. Here, the landscape is shaped by stone mesas, red canyons, and wide stretches of desert. Water is precious, and the people who lived here 5 centuries ago learned to treat it as sacred. Every drop mattered, every stream was honored, every rain cloud welcomed like a gift. Among these desert lands, communities built remarkable homes. Pueblos, multi-storied dwellings made of stone and adobe rose from the earth, as though they had grown directly out of the cliffs. Their walls glowed golden and red in the late light of evening, holding the warmth of the sun. Ladders leaned against doorways. Terraces and rooftops made gathering spaces where families could meet, children could play, and corn could be dried in the sun. Step inside one of these homes, and you would find cool shade. The walls, thick with clay and stone, kept the heat of the desert at bay. Pottery jars, carefully painted with graceful designs, held water and grain. Baskets, woven from reeds and grasses, rested neatly against the walls. The space was simple, purposeful, and filled with the marks of many hands. The heart of life here was the cornfield. Corn had been grown in the Southwest for countless generations, and it was more than food. It was a companion, a symbol of life itself. Families planted carefully, often in terraced fields or near small streams. In dry stretches, seeds were placed deep, their roots reaching for hidden moisture. Sometimes fields were arranged so that rainwater and runoff could be guided toward the crops. Every stalk of corn that rose was a reminder of patience, skill, and gratitude. Alongside corn, beans and squash grew as well. And in some places, cotton was tended for weaving. The tending of fields was slow, careful work. Women and men alike gave their attention to the soil. Children helped by gathering water, carrying small baskets, and learning by watching. Songs often drifted through the air, planting songs, work songs quiet and steady, carrying the rhythm of hope for a good harvest. When the heat grew heavy, people found comfort in the shade of their homes or the cool of a canyon. Pottery took shape under skilled hands, clay smoothed and painted with patterns of spirals, birds, and rain clouds. Each design carried meaning, linking the practical with the spiritual. A pot was not only for carrying water, it was a piece of memory, a symbol of connection between the earth, the maker, and the family it served. Evenings were gentler, the sun softened, sliding behind mesas and cliffs, and the world glowed with deep colors: gold, amber, violet. Families gathered in plazas or on rooftops. Fires burned low, meals of cornmeal, mush, beans, and roasted squash shared slowly. Laughter mingled with the cooling breeze, and stories carried the voices of generations. Life here was not easy. Summers brought heat and dryness. Winters could be cold and sharp, and crops depended on the right balance of rain. Yet, there was resilience, a calm persistence that had been passed down through centuries. The desert was not empty. It was full of lessons, if one knew how to look. And so the people watched the sky, the soil, and the flight of birds, listening closely to what the land whispered. At night, when the air cooled and the stars filled the sky, the pueblos seemed to glow softly, as if lit from within. Families curled close in their homes. Stories were told of how the world was made, how corn came to be, how balance must be kept between people and the land. The quiet hum of crickets, the far call of a night bird, and the rustle of wind through desert plants filled the spaces between words. If you picture yourself here, sitting on a rooftop with the warm stones beneath you, you might feel the desert stillness settle deep in your chest. The air is dry, the stars are close, and the world feels at once vast and intimate. In the southwest, life was carved slowly out of stone and sun, made rich not by plenty, but by care, patience, and deep respect. The land shifts again as we journey farther north and west. The air grows damp and cool, filled with the scent of cedar and salt. Here, the coast stretches long and winding, bordered by towering forests and washed by the waves of the Pacific Ocean. Rain drizzles often, softening the earth, feeding mosses that cling to tree trunks and making rivers swell with life. 500 years ago, this region was rich beyond measure. The sea gave fish in abundance, salmon returning year after year to the rivers, their silver bodies flashing in the current. Shellfish clung to rocky shores. Seals, whales, and sea otters swam in the waves. From the forest came deer, berries, and endless cedar trees, whose wood became homes, tools, and canoes. Communities here built large plank houses from cedar, strong and enduring. The trees themselves seemed to offer their bodies willingly, splitting into boards that could be smoothed and fitted side by side. These houses could be enormous, long and wide, sheltering many families together. Inside, fires burned steadily, the smoke curling upward toward the roof vents. The air smelled of wood, of smoke, of fish drying near the fire. Life on the northwest coast followed the rhythm of the seasons. In spring and summer, people traveled to fishing grounds. Canoes, carved from single great logs of cedar, glided across rivers and along the coastline. Strong, sleek, and beautiful, these canoes carried families, goods, and stories between villages. At the height of salmon season, nets and traps were placed in rivers, and the catch was plentiful. Fish were cleaned, split, and hung to dry on racks, smoked slowly so they would last through the long winters. Work was shared, and it was also art. Wood carvers shaped masks and poles, each design rich with meaning. Eagles, bears, whales, and other beings, both natural and spiritual. The figures carved into towering cedar poles told stories of family, of ancestry, of events remembered. Every mark of the blade carried significance. Even baskets, mats, and clothing woven from cedar bark or grasses were made with patterns that held meaning. Nothing was plain. Every object carried memory and identity. Food, too, was more than survival. Feasts were held to celebrate, to honor guests, to share wealth, and to give thanks. Salmon roasted over open fires. Berries were mashed and dried into cakes. Shellfish steamed in pits lined with hot stones. The meals were as much about gathering as eating. Moments when the community came together to laugh, to tell stories, to strengthen bonds. The coast could be stormy, the ocean fierce, the winters dark and wet. But the people here lived with the rhythm of these forces, not against them. They knew the tides, the seasons of salmon, the habits of animals. The cedar forest provided warmth and shelter, the ocean provided food and travel, and the two together shaped a world that was rich and balanced. At night, inside the great plank houses, the firelight glowed on carved beams. Shadows danced across painted designs, and voices carried in the warmth. Elders told stories of raven, of bear, of spirits that shaped the land and taught people how to live. Children curled close, listening with wide eyes, their hearts filling with the weight of memory and the comfort of belonging. If you close your eyes, you might imagine sitting near one of those fires. You feel the rough cedar floor beneath you, the warmth of the flames on your face, the sound of rain pattering softly on the roof outside. The air is rich with the scent of fish and wood smoke, and as the storyteller's voice rises and falls, you feel time itself slow down, as though the forest, the sea, and the people are all breathing together in one steady rhythm. In this world of forests and tides, the home was not only a shelter, it was a gathering of lives and memories, carved in cedar, sung in stories, and carried forward by each new generation. The land shifts once more as we travel far into the north. Here, the trees thin and disappear, giving way to tundra, to wide spaces of snow, and to a silence so deep it seems to hum in your ears. In winter, the sun may barely rise, casting only a pale glow along the horizon. In summer, the light lingers, stretching the days long. The air is crisp and sharp, the kind of cold that makes every breath visible. This is the world of the Arctic and subarctic. 500 years ago, it was not an easy place to live, but for those who called it home, it was a place filled with meaning, beauty, and resilience. Homes here took many forms, shaped by season and need. In the far north, families built igloot snow houses, carefully cut and stacked into domes that were warmer than one might ever imagine. The snow, packed just right, held in heat, turning the inside into a shelter against the biting wind. In the subarctic, where forests still grew, people built lodges from wood, bark, and hides, often insulated with moss or earth. In summer, skin tents were light and movable, easy to carry as families followed game. Step inside one of these homes, and you would find warmth. A hearth burned low, fed by seal oil, wood, or moss, depending on what the land provided. Around it, families gathered close, their breath mingling in the dim light. Tools hung on the walls, carefully arranged. Clothing made of fur and hide dried near the warmth, ready to guard against the cold. The air smelled faintly of smoke, of tanned hides, of food cooking slowly. Food here came from the land and the sea, through skill, patience, and deep knowledge. In the Arctic, seals, caribou, and fish provided meat, hides, and bone. Hunters moved with quiet skill, watching the ice, waiting at breathing holes, or traveling long distances across snow. In the subarctic, people fished in rivers, trapped animals, and gathered berries in summer to dry for the long winter months. Nothing was wasted. Each part of the animal skin, bone, sinew, fat had a use, a place in the circle of life. Life was carried forward not just by survival, but by community. In such a demanding land, families relied on one another. Work was shared, knowledge passed down. Children learned early how to stitch warm clothing, how to travel safely on ice, how to notice the smallest signs in weather and snow. Elders shared wisdom slowly, their voices carrying weight like the low sound of the wind. Even in the cold, there was laughter. Inside a warm lodge, children played games with bones or pebbles, imitating the skills of hunters. Songs rose in the dim glow, some playful, some serious, voices weaving together to push back the silence of the long night. Storytelling was especially important here, for the nights were long and deep. Stories gave warmth to the mind, teaching, patience, respect, and humor, all carried from one generation to the next. Step outside, and the world was immense. Snow stretched wide, the horizon clear and distant. The northern lights might ripple across the sky, green, violet, and silver flames dancing in silence. To see them was to feel awe, a reminder of the mysteries above and the connection between earth and sky. The crunch of snow beneath your feet, the sting of cold air on your face, the sound of sled runners gliding across ice. These were the rhythms of life here, and yet, for all the harshness, there was also peace. A small circle of light in a wide land of dark. A close-knit family gathered around a hearth, a song rising gently into the night. Life here was not only survival, it was balance, patience, and quiet joy found in the simplest of things. A warm fire, a shared meal, a story passed along in the dark. If you imagine yourself here, inside a small snow house, the walls glowing faintly in the lamplight, you might feel the deep hush of the Arctic settle over you. Outside, the cold is fierce, but inside, you are wrapped in warmth, surrounded by voices, laughter, and the steady heartbeat of community. Now, the land softens once more. The air grows warmer, heavy with the scent of pine and magnolia, the calls of birds echoing across wide rivers. Here in the southeast, 500 years ago, the land was rich and fertile. Rivers wound through forests, carrying fish and turtles. Fields of corn, beans, and squash flourished in the soil. The summers were long and green, the winters mild. Villages here often gathered around open plazas, with homes arranged in circles or clusters. In some places, great earth mounds rose above the land, built carefully by hand, basket by basket of soil, shaped into platforms for council houses or temples. These mounds stood as reminders of history and community, holding the memory of generations who had built them long before. Homes varied, but many were built of wood and clay, thatched with grasses. Inside, they were cool in the heat of summer, warm when fires burned in the winter. Each home belonged not only to a family, but to the wider circle of the town. Step into one, and you would find woven mats, pottery jars for storing food, and perhaps strings of dried gourds or fish hanging near the hearth. Food was plentiful here, tended with care. Corn was once again the center of life, growing tall in broad fields, its stalks waving gently in the southern breeze. Alongside grew beans, squash, and sunflowers, their seeds gathered for food and oil. Families also fished the rivers, set traps for small animals, and gathered nuts, berries, and wild greens. The meals were varied, nourishing, and often shared in company. Life was full of rhythm, planting in the spring, tending fields through summer, harvesting in autumn. Ceremonies marked these times, bringing people together in thanks and in hope. Feasts were prepared, dances held in open plazas, songs carrying through the night air. Drums and rattles kept time, while voices rose together, strong and steady. These gatherings were not only for celebration, but also for remembering balance. The earth gave, and the people gave thanks. The Southeast was a land of rivers, and those rivers were highways. Canoes carved from great logs glided along the currents, carrying people, goods, and news from one village to another. Trade routes stretched wide, linking the Southeast to distant regions. Shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from faraway lands, and stories from travelers all passed through these waters, weaving connections between communities. Evenings were gentle. Families sat outside their homes, the air alive with the sounds of cicadas and frogs. Children played games in the soft dirt, tossing stones or rolling hoops. Elders spoke of old times, their voices steady, carrying wisdom that seemed as ancient as the mounds themselves. Fires glowed warmly, reflecting in the river water, while the night wrapped everything in its steady embrace. The towns of the Southeast were not just collections of houses, they were circles of belonging. The plaza, the mound, the fields, the rivers, each part connected, each part essential. Life here was woven together, not only with work and food, but with memory, ceremony, and care. If you imagine yourself walking through such a town at twilight, you would hear the soft sounds of life all around you. A woman humming as she stirs a pot of cornmeal, the splash of a paddle as a canoe returns to shore, children's laughter ringing clear before it fades into the night. Above, the stars begin to shine, mirrored in the quiet river, while the warmth of the firelight promises comfort and rest. Here, in the Southeast, the balance of river, forest, and community created a world both lively and calm, grounded in the steady flow of the seasons. It was a world where each person had a place, and each day carried both work and joy. When we think about life 5 centuries ago, it is easy to picture great hunts, harvest feasts, or ceremonies. But so much of each day was quieter, the ordinary rhythm of building, making, and caring. These details, though small, held life together. They were the thread that wove families and communities into a whole. Homes came in many forms, shaped by land and climate. We have walked through longhouses of bark and wood in the eastern forests, typus on the wide plains, pueblos of stone and adobe in the southwest, plank houses of cedar in the northwest, and snow shelters or skin lodges in the Arctic. Each type of home was perfectly suited to its place, yet what they all shared was warmth, care, and belonging. Step inside any of these shelters, and you would find more than walls. You would find the traces of love in small things. A child's toy carved from bone, a mat woven from reeds with patterns carefully chosen, a basket filled with berries gathered by careful hands. Homes were not just shelters against weather. They were spaces filled with memory, laughter, and the steady pulse of daily life. Clothing, too, was made with care. In the colder regions, garments were sewn from hides and furs, soft deerskin, sturdy caribou, warm rabbit, or beaver. In the warmer southeast, woven fibers and cotton could be used, sometimes decorated with beads or dyed patterns. Across the continent, people adorned themselves with what the land offered: shells from the coast, feathers from birds, stones polished smooth, beads carved from bone. The making of clothing was more than necessity. It was also art. A pair of moccasins might be stitched carefully, decorated with quills or beads, each mark telling a story or carrying a blessing. A cloak might be lined with fur to keep out the cold, but its edges were finished with designs that showed pride and identity. To wear these garments was to wear not just protection, but also beauty and meaning. Tools were everywhere, each shaped by patient hands. Stone was chipped into arrowheads, scrapers, and blades. Bones became needles, fishhooks, or awls. Wood was carved into handles, bowls, and paddles. Clay was molded into pots, smoothed and painted, then hardened in fire. Nothing was wasted, and nothing was rushed. Each tool carried the skill of its maker, and the quiet satisfaction of usefulness. Imagine, for a moment, the sound of these tasks. The gentle scraping of hide as a woman prepares it for clothing. The rhythmic tapping of stone against stone as a man shapes a blade. The whoosh of a potter's hand smoothing clay. The faint rattle of beads being threaded onto a garment. These sounds were the heartbeat of daily life, as steady and essential as the crackle of fire or the rustle of wind in the trees. Children learned by watching, by helping, by being given small tasks. A boy might carry wood for the fire, imitating the movements of his father. A girl might practice weaving grasses into a tiny mat, guided by the patient hands of her mother or grandmother. In this way, skills passed from one generation to the next, not through books, but through living moments. And so, even the simplest things, a basket, a pair of shoes, a clay pot, were never truly simple. They were filled with time, patience, and care. They were signs of connection between people and land, between parents and children, between past and future. If you close your eyes, you can imagine holding one of these objects. A bowl, smooth under your fingers, cool to the touch. A garment, soft with wear, smelling faintly of wood smoke. A tool, heavy and steady, fitting your hand perfectly. In each, you feel not only the material: clay, hide, wood, stone, but also the lives that shaped it. The tenderness of daily life was not loud or grand. It was quiet, woven into tasks repeated with love. It was a home that sheltered, clothes that warmed, tools that served, and objects that carried memory. These were the details that made life steady, strong, and deeply human. If you truly want to know how people lived, you can sit with them at their table, or in this case, their fire. Food is never just food. It is memory, connection, and gratitude. 500 years ago, across the vast lands of North America, mealtime was when the work of hands and the gifts of the earth came together. The daily meals were often simple: corn boiled into porridge, flavored with beans or squash, a stew of venison simmering with wild roots, flat cakes of cornmeal baked on hot stones. In the north, strips of dried fish softened in broth. In the desert, roasted cactus pads, spiced with herbs. Each meal carried the taste of the land, for the land provided every ingredient. Food was not wasted. Every part of a plant or animal was used if possible. Bones became soup. Skins became tools. Seeds were saved for planting. This carefulness was not only practical, it was also respectful. The earth was seen as alive, and what it gave was received with gratitude. Yet meals were not only about survival. They were about sharing. Picture a family gathered around a fire, the pot bubbling, children peeking in, eager to taste, hands passing bowls, laughter mixing with the steam that rises into the night air. The warmth of the food seems to enter not only the body, but also the heart. Feasts were even more special: a successful hunt, the ripening of crops, the return of salmon, the start of a new season. All could be reasons to gather. Whole communities would come together, bringing what they had to share. Fires burned high, the smell of roasting meat filled the air. Baskets overflowed with corn, beans, nuts, and berries. Food was prepared with ceremony. In some places, prayers were spoken before the first bite, thanking the earth, the plants, and the animals. In others, songs were sung or dances performed. As part of the giving and receiving, eating was never only about filling the stomach. It was about remembering connection. The flavors, too, were rich and varied. Think of roasted venison, tender and smoky. Think of corn cakes with a hint of sweetness. Think of salmon, grilled over open flames until the skin crackled, eaten with handfuls of wild greens. Or berries crushed into sauce, tangy and sweet, shared among friends. Even the simplest foods carried depth because they were fresh, seasonal, and earned with effort. Children learned through these gatherings. They watched how food was prepared, how the first piece might be offered to an elder or to the fire. They learned that cooking was not only work, but a way of showing care. A pot of stew simmering all day was also a quiet message. You belong here. You are fed. You are loved. The senses were full. The crackle of firewood, the golden glow of flame, the sound of voices weaving together in song and story. The smell of roasting meat carried far into the night air, reaching even those still making their way to the gathering. And when the food was finally shared, when bowls and baskets were passed from hand to hand, there was a stillness for a moment, a quiet joy in the act of eating together. If you close your eyes, you might picture yourself sitting cross-legged on the grass at one of these feasts. The bowl in your hand is warm, the stew rich with flavor. Around you, children laugh, elders speak, dogs wander hopefully, noses twitching. The night sky spreads above, wide and filled with stars. The meal is more than food. It is memory, comfort, and the steady heartbeat of community. In the end, food was never just about hunger. It was about the circle of giving the earth to the people to each other, and everyone back to the earth in gratitude. That circle was the taste of life itself. When the day's work was done, and the tools were put away, another kind of work began, the weaving of stories. Across the continent, in every region, people gathered close to the fire. The flames crackled, smoke curled upward, and the night pressed in around the edges. In that circle of warmth, words came alive. Stories were more than entertainment. They were memory, history, instruction, and delight, all at once. Without written books, the people carried their knowledge in voices. A tale passed from elder to child was not fragile. It was strong, because each time it was told, it was refreshed, shaped by the teller's breath and the listener's ears. Some stories were about the beginning of the world. They spoke of how the earth was formed, how rivers were placed, how animals received their traits. These tales gave meaning to the land and reminded people that they were part of something vast and interconnected. Other stories were about clever tricksters like Raven in the northwest, or Coyote in the southwest, or Nanabazo in the forests of the Great Lakes. These tricksters were mischievous, sometimes foolish, sometimes wise. They made people laugh, but they also taught lessons: to be humble, to be clever, to respect the balance of life. There were also heroic stories of hunters who followed great animals, of women who discovered new foods, of leaders who brought peace between villages. These tales were not only about individuals, but about the strength of the community, the courage of working together, and the values that kept life steady. Around the fire, voices carried gently. The elder's voice might be low and measured, drawing listeners close. Children leaned forward, eyes wide, clutching blankets or each other's hands. Adults listened too, though they might smile at parts they had heard many times before. Stories were not only for children, they were for everyone, a way of keeping hearts soft and minds sharp. Some nights, stories were filled with laughter. A tale of Coyote's mischief might send children rolling on the ground, giggling until their sides hurt. Other nights, the stories were hushed and solemn, speaking of spirits, of ancestors, of the mysteries of dreams and the afterlife. Whatever the tone, the stories carried power. They reminded people who they were, where they had come from, and how to live. The fire itself seemed part of the telling. Sparks lifted into the dark, like tiny stars. Shadows flickered on the walls of a longhouse or taipai, making carved figures or painted designs come alive in the shifting light. The crackle of wood blended with the rhythm of the words, until it felt as though the fire was listening too. Oral tradition was not only about myths and legends. It included histories of families and nations. Who had moved where, who had made an alliance, who had shown bravery in a time of hardship. Names were spoken aloud so they would not be forgotten. In this way, the past was not something distant. It lived in every voice, every gathering, every spark of firelight. If you imagine yourself there, you might feel the heat of the fire on your face, the cool night air at your back. You hear the storyteller's voice rising and falling, like waves against a shore. The words seem to settle into your very bones. When the story ends, there is a moment of silence, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Then perhaps a chuckle, or a sigh, or the rustle of children being carried off to bed. Storytelling was, in many ways, the heart of life. For through stories, the people remembered who they were, and in remembering, they carried themselves forward, always connected to the voices that came before. If you had stepped into a village or camp 500 years ago, you would not have found people living apart or in isolation. Life was woven together, like threads in a basket, each person important to the whole. Community was not only a place, it was the very way of living. Children were at the heart of it. From their first cry, they belonged not only to their parents, but to the entire circle of family and neighbors. An infant might be carried on its mother's back while she worked in the fields, or held gently by a grandmother who hummed a song older than memory. A father might carve a small toy from wood, while an uncle or aunt taught the child a game or a story. In every region, childhood was shaped by play and by learning through doing. Young ones were not set apart from daily life. They were part of it. A boy might follow older hunters into the forest, carrying a small bow, his eyes wide as he watched each careful movement. A girl might sit beside her mother as she wove a basket, practicing with scraps of reed, her fingers clumsy at first, but patient. Play itself was a form of learning. Children chased each other, played with dolls of corn husk or carved animals, rolled hoops across the ground, or tossed balls in games that echoed the skills of adults. In the Great Lakes and Plains, even games like lacrosse carried deep meaning, preparing the body, the spirit, and the community for strength and cooperation. Elders held a special place in guiding children. Their words carried weight, but their presence carried even more. A child sitting at an elder's side might hear stories not told elsewhere, gentle advice, small lessons, laughter at the follies of youth. In this way, wisdom was not passed in lectures, but in quiet companionship, in moments that lingered long after. Daily life was shared. Work was divided, but never in isolation. A woman might hoe a field alongside her sister and cousin, children at their feet, while the men built a canoe together, shaping it slowly, laughing as they worked. Children absorbed these patterns like air, learning without being told, just by being present. The community also cared for those who needed help. If a family had little food, others shared. If a roof needed repair, neighbors lent hands. The rhythm was not one of strict independence, but of mutual care. The circle of life widened beyond bloodlines, so that each person belonged to something larger. Evenings were tender. After a day of work and play, children often drifted to sleep, listening to the soft murmur of adult voices, the crackle of fire, the lull of night insects. Some fell asleep curled in their mother's arms, others tucked into blankets of hide or woven fiber, their small breaths blending into the greater hum of the village night. If you close your eyes, you can imagine one of those evenings. A group of children laugh as they finish a game, the air cooling as stars appear overhead. Parents call them inside, where the smell of food still lingers. A grandmother strokes a child's hair, humming softly, while in the distance, a drumbeat sounds faintly from a gathering. The world feels whole, safe, and complete. In this way, community and childhood were inseparable. To grow up was to be held, guided, and woven into the larger circle. Every lesson, every game, every story, every shared meal shaped not only the child, but the future of the community itself. The heart of life was togetherness, and within that togetherness, children carried forward the promise of tomorrow. Life 500 years ago was never seen as only physical. The world was filled with spirit in the trees, in the waters, in the winds, in the animals that moved across the land. Every stone, every flame, every living being carried meaning. And so, ceremonies were not rare occasions. They were woven into life, marking the flow of seasons, the cycle of growth, and the ties between people and the unseen world. Some ceremonies were small, intimate moments. A family might give thanks before a meal, offering a pinch of food to the fire or the earth. A hunter might whisper a prayer before loosing an arrow, or after a successful kill, placing tobacco or words of gratitude upon the ground. A mother might sing a blessing over her child as she laid them to sleep. Other ceremonies were great gatherings, filling entire villages and lasting days. Planting and harvest, the return of salmon, the migration of buffalo, the turning of seasons. All these events called for celebration, prayer, and renewal. Fires burned high, dancers moved in circles, and the sound of drums echoed like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Each community had its own ways, but certain patterns were shared. Songs carried memory and prayer. Drums kept rhythm steady and strong. Dancers, clothed in garments of feathers, beads, or painted designs, moved with care, their steps often imitating animals, winds, or the forces of life. Each motion held meaning, passed down from those who danced before. Ceremonies also shaped identity. To take part was not just to watch, but to belong. A child, dancing for the first time, joined a chain stretching back through generations. An elder singing an ancient song kept the memory alive for all. In this way, ceremonies were bridges between past and present, between people and the sacred. There was beauty in the preparation, too. Women gathered to cook food that would feed many. Men prepared drums, rattles, and fires. Elders spoke to remind everyone of the meaning of what was to come. The entire community leaned toward the same purpose, like trees bending together in the wind. Some ceremonies were solemn, meant for healing or mourning. In those times, voices grew quiet, songs slowed, and people gathered close to comfort one another. Grief was never carried alone. The whole community shouldered it, sharing both the burden and the hope of renewal. Other ceremonies were joyful, filled with laughter, feasting, and dancing that lasted long into the night. Children's voices rang bright, fires glowed red, and songs rose into the sky as though the stars themselves might listen. In these moments, life felt abundant, and gratitude filled the air like fragrance. Imagine standing at the edge of one of these gatherings. You hear the steady thump of a drum, the shake of rattles, the rise and fall of voices. The firelight flickers across painted faces and feathered garments. Sparks fly upward, merging with the night sky. Your heart begins to move in time with the rhythm, and for a moment, you feel as though the ground itself is breathing beneath your feet. Spiritual life was not separate from daily life. It was not something practiced only on certain days or in certain places. It was everywhere, in the hunt, in the planting, in the laughter of children, in the telling of stories. The sacred was in the very act of living, and ceremonies were the times when that truth was gathered, focused, and celebrated together. To live was to walk within a great circle: earth, sky, water, fire, people, spirit. And through ceremonies, that circle was honored, remembered, and renewed. Time, 500 years ago, was not counted by clocks or calendars hanging on walls. Time was felt, seen, and heard in the world around. The people lived by the rhythm of the seasons, each turn of weather shaping the way of life. Spring was a time of renewal. Snow melted in the north, rivers swelled, and green shoots pushed up from the soil. Birds returned, their calls filling the air with excitement. Villages stirred with new energy, seeds were planted, fishing nets were mended, canoes repaired. Children splashed in puddles, chasing each other in the fresh sunlight, while elders reminded everyone to give thanks for the new beginning. Summer brought warmth, work, and plenty. Fields of corn stood tall, beans wound their way up the stalks, squash spread broad leaves across the earth, berries ripened in the forests, filling baskets with sweetness. In the north and along the coasts, salmon leapt in rivers, waiting to be caught. Families traveled to hunting grounds or gathered clams and mussels along the shore. Days were long, full of both work and laughter, and evenings glowed with feasts, games, and songs. Autumn carried both beauty and urgency. Leaves blazed red and gold. Animals grew fat for the winter, and fields gave their final gifts. It was a time of harvest and preparation. Corn was dried, meat was smoked, berries and nuts were stored away. Families worked steadily, knowing that what they put aside now would carry them through the cold months ahead. Ceremonies gave thanks, honoring the cycle of giving and receiving. Then came winter, a season of stillness. Snow fell in many regions, blanketing the land in silence. Rivers froze, winds howled across the plains, and the air turned crisp and biting. Yet inside homes, warmth glowed. Fires crackled, smoke curled upward, and families gathered close. Winter was not only a time of hardship, but also of togetherness. Stories were told, tools repaired, clothing made. The pace slowed, inviting reflection and rest. In the far north, where winters were long and fierce, survival meant deep knowledge. Where to find seals beneath the ice, how to build snow shelters, how to use every bit of what the hunt provided. In the warmer south, winter was gentler, yet still a season of gathering close, of remembering gratitude, of planning for the spring to come. Nature itself was a teacher. The geese, flying overhead in long, careful lines, showed how to travel together. The bear, retreating to its den, reminded people of the wisdom of rest. The rivers taught patience, the winds taught respect, the stars guided journeys at night. Life was not lived against nature, but with it, moving in time with its steady music. Children grew up learning these lessons without even realizing it. They knew which berries ripened first, which tracks in the snow belonged to deer or rabbit, how to read the clouds for signs of rain. Each season gave them something to notice, something to carry forward. If you imagine yourself in that world, perhaps you see a family at harvest time, husking corn as the sun sinks low, their hands moving steadily as laughter drifts on the cool air. Or you picture a winter night, snow falling thick outside, while inside a longhouse or lodge, the fire glows warmly and voices rise in story. Each season had its own beauty, its own gifts, and its own wisdom. To live with the land was to live in balance. The seasons were not something to endure, but something to move with, like a canoe gliding with the current. Each turn of the year was a reminder that life itself was a circle: birth, growth, harvest, rest, and renewal again. Though each community lived close to its own rivers, forests, or plains, people were never truly isolated. 500 years ago, the land was crossed by countless paths, some overgrown trails through woods, some broad rivers flowing to the sea, some wide plains that stretched as far as the eye could see. These were the roads of their time, and through them, people traveled, traded, and connected. Rivers were perhaps the greatest highways. A canoe carved from a single cedar log in the northwest could glide with ease across calm water or ride the rhythm of waves along the coast. On the Great Lakes, broad dugouts carried families and goods for miles upon miles. On the wide rivers of the southeast, paddles dipped in unison, their sound like the beating of a drum. Waterways carried people faster and farther than any trail, linking villages hundreds of miles apart. Overland routes also crisscrossed the continent. Some followed game trails, others stretched between major villages, becoming worn smooth by countless feet. On the plains, paths curved with the movement of buffalo herds, guiding hunters from one camp to the next. In the desert, trails wound carefully between springs and waterholes, each one remembered and passed down with care. Trade flowed along these routes like a living thread. From the Great Lakes, copper was carried outward, gleaming in the sun. From the Gulf Coast came seashells, polished into beads and ornaments. From the plains came hides and meat. From the deserts came salt. From the north came furs. From the south came cotton and woven cloth. No village had everything, but together, the land was abundant. Trade was more than goods. It was also friendship, alliance, and story. When travelers arrived from another village, they were welcomed with food, with talk, with laughter. Around fires, they exchanged not only baskets or beads, but also news: who had married, who had moved, who had seen a great herd or a plentiful river. These gatherings wove ties that held communities together across great distances. Journeys were not always easy. A sudden storm could overturn a canoe, or snow could bury a trail. But travelers moved with skill, guided by stars, sun, and memory. Children learned early how to read the land, how moss grew thick on the north side of trees, how the flight of birds could lead to water, how certain landmarks could guide you home. Travel also carried ceremonies and dances across distances. A sacred song sung in one place might be heard again in another, carried by travelers who remembered its rhythm. Ideas and stories, like goods, moved along the paths, reminding people that the land was wide, but it was also shared. If you close your eyes, you might picture yourself gliding down a slow river in a canoe. The paddle dips silently, the water ripples outward, the forest reflects in the surface. You hear birds calling, see fish darting below, and feel the steady pull of the current carrying you onward. Or you might picture walking a narrow trail through tall grass, the sun warm on your shoulders, the horizon stretching endlessly ahead, each step bringing you closer to another circle of firelight, another community waiting with welcome. The paths across the land were not just routes of travel, they were the threads of connection, binding people together, carrying not only what was needed for survival, but what was needed for belonging, friendship, story, and the reassurance that no one was ever truly alone. Everywhere people lived, they made not only what was useful, but what was beautiful. 500 years ago, art was not separate from daily life. It was part of it, woven into clothing, carved into tools, painted onto walls, sung into the air. To live was to create, and every act of creation carried spirit. Consider a basket, for instance. It could be plain, meant to carry corn or berries, but more often it was woven with patterns, zigzags, diamonds, flowing lines that echoed rivers or mountains. The maker's hands moved with practiced grace, shaping not just something to hold food, but something to hold meaning. Or think of pottery. Clay gathered from riverbanks was shaped into bowls and jars. Some were smoothed and polished until they shone. Others were painted with designs, animals, spirals, symbols that told stories. Each pot carried the mark of its maker, quiet signature in shape and style. Clothing, too, was art. Moccasins stitched from soft deer hide might be decorated with dyed quills, beads, or shells, each pattern unique. In colder lands, cloaks and hoods lined with fur were often edged with designs that spoke of identity and care. Even in the smallest details, the fringe of a sleeve, the colors of a belt, beauty was present. Wood and stone held endless possibilities. Carvers in the northwest shaped towering cedar poles, each figure layered with story. In the plains, pipe stems were carved with images of animals and skies. In the Arctic, ivory from walrus tusks became tiny carvings of seals or birds, their smooth surfaces polished by patient hands. Music filled the air, too. Flutes carved from wood or bone sent soft melodies drifting across the night. Drums gave rhythm to dance, rattles shook in time, voices rose together in song. These sounds were as much a part of art as carvings or pottery, expressions of spirit, alive in the moment. Dance itself was art in motion. Steps imitated the flight of eagles, the prowl of a bear, the sway of the wind. Garments added to the effect, feathers catching the firelight, shells rattling in time with the beat, painted faces glowing in the glow of flame. A dance was not only performance, it was prayer, memory, and joy all moving together. Even the land itself became canvas. Designs were painted on the walls of pueblos, etched into rocks, drawn in the sand for children's play. No place was too ordinary for beauty. It lived in everything, because life itself was seen as worthy of celebration. Art was also a gift between people. A carved tool might be given with respect, a woven belt presented as a sign of friendship, a song shared at a gathering to honor guests. Beauty was not hoarded, it was shared, passed hand to hand, voice to voice, heart to heart. If you imagine yourself holding one of these creations, perhaps a small carved figure of a bird, you would feel the smooth surface, the careful lines etched by steady hands. You would sense not only the bird itself, but also the quiet hours spent shaping it, the love placed in its making. Or perhaps you hear the low, steady sound of a drum at night, the beat echoing in your chest until you feel part of the song itself. In every region, in every community, art reminded people that life was not only about survival, it was also about joy, beauty, and expression. It was about making the ordinary sacred, about filling each day with the touch of spirit. And so, 500 years ago, the land was not only filled with villages, rivers, and forests, it was also filled with songs drifting on the air, patterns painted in clay, carvings standing tall, dances spinning like flames. The world itself was a gallery, alive with creation. For native peoples 500 years ago, the world was not divided between human and nature. The earth, the rivers, the trees, the animals, all were kin. Each had spirit, each had purpose, and each deserved respect. When a hunter stepped into the forest, he did not think only of his bow or the deer he hoped to find. He thought of the forest itself, the hush of branches, the watchful eyes of birds, the hidden streams that carried life. He walked carefully, quietly, not wanting to disturb more than he must. If he did take an animal, he offered thanks, sometimes with words, sometimes with tobacco, sometimes with a gesture of reverence, for the gift of life was not taken lightly. The same was true by the waters. A fisherman casting a net knew the fish were not endless. He took only what was needed, and often left offerings in gratitude. If the salmon returned each year to the rivers of the Northwest, it was because they were welcomed and honored, not simply caught. Songs were sung to greet them, dances performed to show respect, as though they were guests, not prey. Farmers, too, worked with humility. Corn, beans, and squash were not just crops. They were three sisters, living beings who grew together, each helping the other. Corn gave stalks for beans to climb. Beans gave strength to the soil. Squash spread wide leaves to protect the earth. Planting was done with ceremony. Seeds placed carefully, prayers whispered for their growth. Even when wood was cut for homes or canoes, the tree was honored. In the Northwest, great cedar trees might be approached with words of gratitude before being felled. In the plains, every part of the buffalo was used: hide for shelter, bones for tools, sinew for thread. Nothing was wasted, because to waste was to disrespect. This sense of kinship extended to the smallest things. A stone shaped into a tool was not just rock, it carried memory of the mountain it came from. A feather found on the ground was not just decoration, it was the gift of a bird, carrying a trace of its flight. Even water, scooped into a bowl to drink, was approached with reverence, for it carried life itself. Children were taught this respect from their earliest days. If they picked berries, they were reminded not to strip the bush bare, but to leave some for the birds, for the bears, for others who might come. If they hunted rabbits, they were told to give thanks, to recognize the rabbit's life and spirit. These teachings were not heavy lectures, but gentle reminders, woven into stories and everyday tasks. To live in balance meant knowing limits. It meant remembering that people were part of a circle above it. If the deer were overhunted, the forest would grow empty. If the river was taken for granted, the fish would vanish. But when balance was kept, life flourished. The people thrived. The animals thrived. The land itself thrived. If you picture yourself there, perhaps you see a hunter kneeling beside a deer, touching the earth in thanks before carrying it home. Or you see a family planting seeds in spring, their hands pressing soil gently, their voices soft with prayer. Or maybe you stand by a river at night, hearing the splash of salmon, the stars reflected in the water, and you feel the deep truth that all life is connected. This was the way of respect, not as rule or law, but as a way of seeing the world. To live with gratitude, to take only what was needed, to honor every gift. This was balance. It shaped not only survival, but also the heart of their lives. a harmony with the world that endured from one season to the next, from one generation to another. Imagine waking up in a village 500 years ago. The sun is rising, smoke curls lazily from cooking fires, and voices are beginning to stir. The sound of children's laughter drifts between homes, while dogs bark playfully in the distance. Daily life was not rushed, yet it was steady, filled with the rhythm of tasks and togetherness. Each day began with the essentials: tending to fires, fetching water, preparing food. Women might grind corn into meal, their stones making a soft, steady rhythm. Men might step out to hunt or check traps. Children carried wood, gathered berries, or fetched water in small containers. Everyone had a role, and each role mattered. Yet the work was shared, not just among family, but across the village. If a house was being built, neighbors helped. If a field was being planted or harvested, many hands worked together. Community was not an idea, it was the way of life. No one was left alone to carry burdens too heavy. Meals were times of gathering. A pot of stew might simmer over a fire, filled with corn, beans, squash, or wild game. Families sat together, sometimes sharing with neighbors, always with a sense of gratitude. Food was more than nourishment, it was connection, a reminder that what the earth gave was best enjoyed together. Children's lives were full of learning and play, often at the same time. They practiced using bows with tiny arrows, learned to weave small baskets, or copied the steps of dances they had seen. Games filled the open spaces, tossing balls, racing, or playing games of chance with carved sticks. Their laughter was as much a part of the village as the crackle of fires or the calls of birds. Elders held a special place. Their wisdom guided decisions. Their stories carried the memory of generations. In the evenings, when the day's work was done, families and neighbors often gathered to hear them speak. Around the fire, children listened wide-eyed, while adults nodded at lessons they had heard many times before. These moments were not only entertainment, but education, passing knowledge through story and song. The village itself was alive with sound and movement. Dogs trotted between homes. Children chased each other in play. People called to one another across open spaces. The air was filled with the smell of wood smoke, cooked food, earth, and plants. It was a place where life was shared openly, where one person's joy or sorrow was carried by many. On special days, the rhythm shifted. Ceremonies, dances, and feasts brought the whole community together. Songs rose into the sky, drums set the pace, and people danced in circles, their steps echoing the heartbeat of the earth. These gatherings renewed bonds, reminded everyone of gratitude, and wove a sense of belonging too deep to be shaken. If you picture yourself there, perhaps you are sitting outside a lodge or longhouse, a bowl of stew, warming your hands as neighbors pass by with smiles and greetings. Or you are watching children play by the river, their shouts ringing through the air as the sun sets golden behind them. Or maybe you sit by the fire at night, listening to a story unfold, feeling the warmth of flames and the closeness of others beside you. Community life was not always easy. There were times of hunger, sickness, or hardship, but those burdens were never faced alone. The strength of daily life came not from one person, but from many, living together, working together, and carrying each other through the circle of the seasons. In every community, there were those whose voices carried special weight, leaders, guides, and elders whose wisdom helped the people walk in balance. Leadership 500 years ago was not about power for its own sake. It was about responsibility, about serving the community, and about listening as much as speaking. Often, leaders were chosen because they had shown kindness, courage, or wisdom. A chief or headman was not a ruler in the way kings ruled across the ocean. Instead, here sometimes she was a guide, a voice who spoke for the good of the people. If the leader lost the trust of the community, the people could choose another. Authority rested not on force, but on respect. Decisions were rarely made by one person alone. Councils were common, where elders, leaders, and respected members of the community gathered to talk. People listened patiently, often sitting in long silence while each voice was heard. The goal was not to win an argument, but to find agreement, to reach a choice that served everyone as best as possible. Elders, too, carried immense importance. Their years had given them experience. Their memory reached back through generations. They remembered past winters, past hunts, past conflicts, and could offer guidance rooted in history. Their words were not rushed, but measured, spoken with care, like stones placed carefully in a fire circle. Spiritual leaders also played a role, offering prayers, ceremonies, and healing. They reminded the people of their connection to the unseen world, the world of spirit. Sometimes they gave advice on when to plant, when to travel, when to hold ceremonies. Other times they helped heal the sick, using herbs, songs, and rituals passed down over centuries. But wisdom was not held by leaders alone. Every person had a voice, and every voice mattered. In some nations, women held strong influence in councils, guiding decisions about land, families, and peace. In others, young people listened, but were expected to speak as they grew, learning to carry responsibility with age. Leadership showed itself in times of difficulty. If there was hunger, a leader made sure food was shared fairly. If there was conflict, a leader worked for peace before war. If danger threatened, a leader was often the first to step forward with courage. And leadership showed itself in times of joy too, guiding ceremonies, welcoming guests, reminding the people to give thanks for what they had. If you picture it, perhaps you see a circle of people seated on the ground or in a large house, firelight flickering on their faces. One person speaks slowly, his words deliberate, while others listen in silence. Then another speaks, offering a different view. The night passes, not in argument, but in patient listening, until a path forward is clear. Or perhaps you see a leader walking among the people, stopping to ask about a family's health, sharing a laugh with children, helping mend a canoe. Leadership was not distant, it was close, steady, present. In this way, wisdom guided the people. It was not a heavy hand, but a gentle compass, always turning back toward balance. The leaders did not stand above, but among, carrying the same burdens, sharing the same joys, reminding the people that true strength lay not in one, but in all. When the day's work was done, when fires glowed warmly in the night and the stars shimmered overhead, voices would rise with stories. Storytelling was not only entertainment, it was history, lesson, memory, and joy woven into words. 500 years ago, books were not the keepers of knowledge. People themselves carried the past in their voices. Elders remembered long journeys, battles, great hunts, and peaceful harvests. Parents told children stories that had been told to them when they were young. In this way, tradition was not just preserved, it was alive, breathing in each retelling. Some stories explained the world. They told how the sun and moon came to be, why the bear sleeps through winter, why the coyote is clever but sometimes foolish. These were not only tales, but lessons, shaping how children saw nature and their place within it. Other stories carried history. They remembered migrations, great leaders, moments of hardship and triumph. A boy or girl sitting by the fire might hear of the time their people crossed a wide river, or survived a harsh winter, or made peace with the neighboring nation. These stories bound the community together, reminding them of who they were and where they came from. Still other stories carried laughter. Trickster figures appeared again and again, sly animals who stole fire, played tricks, or got into trouble because of greed or pride. Children giggled at the mischief, but beneath the humor was always a lesson. Be clever, but do not be selfish. Be brave, but not foolish. Storytelling was an art of rhythm. A good storyteller did not rush. They paused in just the right places, let silence fill the air before a surprise, and used their voice to make listeners lean forward or laugh aloud. Some stories were short, told in a few minutes. Others stretched on for hours, weaving a world so vivid that listeners felt as though they were walking inside it. Tradition also lived in song and chant. Words repeated in rhythm carried power, reminding the people of their bond with the earth and sky. Dances themselves were forms of story, with steps that echoed the flight of birds, the movement of animals, or the cycle of the seasons. If you imagine it now, Perhaps you sit with others in a warm lodge or longhouse, the firelight dancing on the walls. The voice of an elder rises slowly, deep and calm, while children lean close, eyes wide. Outside, the wind may whisper against the roof, but inside there is only the story, a story that seems to carry the whole world in its words. Stories were not only about the past, they were about the future. By teaching children through story, the people prepared them to live wisely, to respect the land, to care for each other. A story was more than memory. It was guidance, hope, and strength passed gently from one generation to the next. In this way, storytelling kept the people alive, not just in body, but in spirit. Long after the fire burned low, long after the voice of the storyteller grew quiet, the lessons lingered in the mind, like embers glowing softly in the dark. We have walked together through villages and forests, across rivers and plains, into homes warmed by firelight, and beneath skies filled with stars. We have seen how native peoples lived 500 years ago, with balance, with respect, with joy and beauty woven into every part of life. As we look back, certain lessons rise gently to the surface, like stones beneath clear water. The first is balance. Life was lived in rhythm with the seasons, with planting and harvest, with rest and renewal. People did not rush against time, but moved with it. It is a reminder to us, even now, that life flows more smoothly when we walk with the rhythm of the world, not against it. The second is respect. The land was not a possession to be owned, but a gift to be cared for. Animals, rivers, trees, even stones carried spirit, and each was honored. From this comes a quiet teaching, that gratitude and humility can shape every part of how we live, if we only pause to give thanks. The third is community. No one was left to face hardship alone. Work was shared, joy was shared, sorrow was shared. A village was not simply a collection of homes, but a circle of belonging. This reminds us that our own strength often lies not in standing apart, but in standing together. The fourth is memory. Stories carried history, wisdom, and laughter across generations. In them, the past was never lost, and the future was always prepared for. In our own lives, perhaps we too can hold to the power of story, remembering, sharing, and passing forward what matters most. And finally, there is beauty. Even the simplest tools, garments, or songs were shaped with care, decorated with patterns, filled with spirit. Life was not only about surviving, but about celebrating, about filling each day with meaning and joy. If you close your eyes, you might feel it, the rhythm of a drum beneath your feet, the warmth of a fire on your face, the sound of a river flowing softly in the dark. You might see the bright fields of summer, the glowing leaves of autumn, the quiet snows of winter, the fresh green shoots of spring. You might hear the voice of a storyteller, carrying wisdom that has lived for centuries. And as the story draws to a close, perhaps you carry a quiet sense of peace, a reminder that 500 years ago, people lived in ways both different and deeply familiar. They laughed, they worked, they sang, they told stories, they cared for one another. Their world was rich, alive, and full of lessons that still speak gently to us today. So, as the last embers of the fire fade and the night grows still, let the story settle within you. Let it remind you of balance, respect, community, memory, and beauty. Let it carry you softly toward rest, as if you too were sitting beneath a star-filled sky, listening to voices rise and fall in the quiet night. And with that, the journey comes to an end, not with a loud closing, but with a soft pause, like the hush of wind in the trees. The people of 500 years ago have shared their wisdom. Now, it rests with you to carry forward quietly, gently, your own life.